Hey guys, this is Brandon Miller from Masonry. We recently sat down at 875 Washington Street with Corey Baker from Consortium Brands, Ed Bertucci from Roller Rabbit, Alessandro Capelli from Boggi North America, and Sean Peen from Isaia. It was thoughtful, practical, and honestly one of those conversations where you leave the room thinking a little differently. And we're excited to share it. And a quick thank you to our friends at RFR and Raycliffe Capital for making this conversation possible. All right. The goal here is to have an opportunity to actually learn something about what's happening in the business from the horse's mouth. And I just want to say thank you all for, in most cases, years of friendship and business that we've done together, and supporting us and sharing your knowledge and insights with the crowd here. If you'd like, I'd like you to take a moment to introduce yourselves, what you do, what you're doing currently, and then also what was your first job in the retail or fashion space, just as a little fun tidbit about yourselves, and then we'll get into the broader conversation. So, Al, you want to start?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alessandro Capelli. I'm the CEO for Boggi North America. Here in the US, we just started our expansion 1 year ago. I'm sure you know the brand, but we are more or less in over than 260 countries globally. But America is our, I would say, new program, new expansion. With a few friends here, we're doing a very nice job so far, opening some stores. Fun fact, my first job in retail was designing stores for Ferragamo very, very long time ago. And I did a few changes in my career, I would say, recently, and this is where we are right now.
Cut your teeth in store design. Cool. And Sean?
Hi, Sean Peen. Currently be head of merchandising and buying for Isaia Spa. And prior to that, I've been in various roles, whether it's Valentino, Balmain, Saks. I spent 10 years at Saks in their buying office. And my first role was a luxury retailer by the name of J.C. Penney out of Dallas, Texas, for those who are familiar, and learned all the ins and outs of retail buying, planning.
I've been with Roller Rabbit now coming up to 7 years. Started as a chief operating officer and ended up becoming the CEO a few years ago now. So it's been an amazing journey. And prior to that was in consulting here in New York with a gentleman named Robert Burke, who's an incredible guy and still one of our mentors. My first job in retail was in the city of Sydney, where I'm from, for Ralph Lauren in their store in the Queen Victoria building. And that was when Ralph was licensed, like he was in a lot of international countries, with a company called Oraton. So we had like the Australian version of Ralph, which wasn't the real thing, but it was like close to it. And I was there when I was at university, 18. I wasn't a very good salesperson, but I was good at folding.
Good morning. My name is Corey Baker. I'm one of the founders of Consortium Brand Partners. We're a investment fund focused on consumer brands. And I am also a recovering lawyer. So my first job was in fashion, was actually an IP attorney.
And what are some of the assets that you currently own within this?
So we started this fund a few years ago, and we bought a brand called Draper James that was founded by Reese Witherspoon. So we've been Reese's partner for the last 3 years on that. Outdoor Voices, Jonathan Adler, and most recently, California Pizza Kitchen.
Great. All right. So one of my first questions that I wanted to ask you all today collectively, and I'm sure the majority of the people in the room are curious too, but what do you feel about the consumer mentality, their appetite for consumption, their strength of consumption? If you could just give us some either anecdotes or your opinion or some data points that could give us some guidance of where the customer was in 25, where you anticipate them heading in 26 on like a psychological basis, and also propensity to spend.
As I was saying, we are in a very, I would say, early phase here in the States, so we're still comparing a lot what our customers are elsewhere in the world and what the customers here for us here in America, because of course it's a different mentality, it's a different style of shopping, it's a different way of everything is of course very very different. Our customers tend to shop through fidelization. Like, I mean, the brand that we created always had a very, I would say, continuous and I would say steady growth, I would say, because what we tend to do is to make sure that our clients are knowing the brand, meeting the brand, and then getting familiar. We are a brand established very, very long time ago where, the grandfather used to bring their son and then the grandson and stuff like that. So having that said, like, I mean, we tend to find customers that wants to shop with us because they like what we're doing and they tend to come back. We found here in the States a very loyal customers that was happy to find us after seeing us in Europe, which is very interesting. Of course, the challenge now is to make sure that we found a customer that doesn't know us at all, because it's the easy win is the ones that we bring from Europe, of course. But again, like, I mean, it's a matter of pure fidelization for us. Like, I mean, making sure that they like what we do, and they always come back to find the little differences and nuances of our product, because this is essentially not being a fashionist brand. This is how we build the trust with our clients.
Yeah, it's funny. I think of one of the first things I learned in retail, which is, the guiding principle of product, in consumer goods is how does the product relate to the consumer? And I think now more so than ever, you see that with the information that's being provided, how marketing has changed. Everything now is sort of in-home marketing, right? You grab your phone, you're being served ads consistently. If you talk about cooking or skiing, all of a sudden you see cooking and skiing ads or whatever it is that's being placed. So it really is, how does it relate to people's lifestyle? And so I think, their shopping patterns have changed because the information that's being served to them tailors them. All right. And so from a general macro marketing standpoint, the consumer has gone from, processing information to downloading information. You wake up, you look at your phone, you've gone through emails, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. So you've gotten all this information, and then now it's like, what do you do with it, right? So either you're going to be impulsive and quick to buy right then and there, or you throw it in the cart, and then you process whether you shop for that, later or things like that. So, and I think for us, for our brand, we're a luxury brand. We sit, I would say, up there with, Keaton, Cucinelli, and that consumer. It's a little bit of a different touch point because it's relatability, right? The product, how does that cater to their lifestyle, places that they're going, how they travel, how they move. And so we have to kind of market a little differently. And so really, I think, the shopping patterns they're so lifestyle based. So whether it's experiential, or needs versus wants, you're going to see this huge shift in 26. Now you're throwing in AI, these algorithms that very much, for those who watch Minority Report, the movie, like the marketing ads, what I see and what you see are going to be two different things, and it's just catered to lifestyle. So you're going to see that start to evolve in a more clear and precise way to each consumer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky at Roller Rabbit. We serve multiple generations just by nature of the business. It's been around for a while, and we've introduced Gen Z to the business. So we have a unique challenge where we're trying to talk to lots of different age groups at one time. One thing that I think we've seen last year and this year, which is maybe a counterpoint and perhaps relevant to this audience, is that we focus a lot now on offline leading to online. So we've seen huge success with us as we've gone to direct to consumer with not traditional stores necessarily, although we certainly have seen a lot of uptick there, but pop-ups, activations on campuses. We have a Roller Rabbit bus that turns up to campuses that has exclusive product. We do a ton of events in stores. And all of that, I think, is because a lot of our customer, particularly Gen Z and millennials, are just craving some sort of like actual experience. And so they get all the information online, they get all the information on Instagram, they understand the brands, they get the competition, all that stuff. And it's like, if you can provide a situation where there's something where they can go with their friends and have fun for 2 hours that's a little offline, we've seen like queues around the block when we do that. And that filters across to marketing as well. So we now spend a huge amount of our time looking at out-of-home marketing, traditional stuff, billboards, all that stuff, catalogs. That's why you guys are seeing so many more catalogs in your mail. Same thing. It's like there is definitely a kind of a psychological craving right now for things that are off your screen. And of course, the cynical side of us is all about how do you eventually get them to your website to buy? And we're seeing that transition. So all of the offline things that we do are effectively customer acquisition plays for attention. But it's still the reality of it is that is something that's like a human need, I think. And so we're trying to lean into that with our offline strategy as well.
Yeah, that all resonates a lot. I think, we look at a pretty broad spectrum of brands and consumer behavior. And I also, you read the reports, the consumer is spending less and brands are having a harder time. I don't really buy it. I don't think the consumer is spending less. I think the consumer is spending more intentionally and they're more focused and it's harder to earn the sale. So things like experiential events, things like targeted ads are a way that, just to connect at a deeper and more personal level. You can say like the athleisure craze is over. It's not true. It's brands are earning it and other brands are not. Athleta is not necessarily earning it. Lululemon continues to earn it. And, Gap has reinvented themselves yet again and is earning customer back and showing success because they're creating a need and a want again. And I think that's what it is that everyone has to understand who they are and what the customer is expecting and give them a reason to shop. There's money in their pocket. I remember I went to a charity event years ago and, the lead fundraiser said that we have good news and bad news. The bad news is we need to raise a lot of money tonight. And the good news is the money's all in your pockets already. And like, I sort of feel it's the same thing in retail, right? Is that there's great opportunities, there's great brands, there's a customer who's ready to spend if you can prove to them it's worthwhile.
Yeah. Excellent. And then in that spirit and on that note, I'd love it if you could each share just one example of an event that you had within your stores or within your brand that you saw unequivocally raising the bar in terms of ability to drive traffic into the store, like Ed was saying. Like what is an example of that you might have done? You all touched on this concept of having multiple forms of activation, but the people in this room, are involved in four-wall retail real estate. So it's like, I'd love them to understand just a data point that you said, this was my home run of 25, or this is something that I learned from in 25 that I'm going to try to have to clear the bar for in 26.
Well, the strategy is still to be, I would say, readjusted because as I was saying, I would mention it often and often. Like, we're still comparing a lot our customers here and there from the ocean. I would say, we found a very, I would say, demanding in a very good way customer here in America because we are a premium brand, high premium brand but we understood that the customers here really wants to have that luxurious hospitality kind of treatment in our stores as well, which is something very, very different from what we have in Europe, for example. Do's and don'ts, and how to make it better for this year. We launched 3 stores this year in America, here in New York, and we did some, opening parties and small activations. But what's gonna be for this year, the biggest trend would be to start doing very local activations of our stores, making sure that a community, the community of the people around our store, not just the broad New York or the broad United States, because it's gonna be impossible to make it with the energy that we currently have, but making sure that the neighborhoods that are around our stores are getting familiar with us, are coming back, and they get used to the people that we have in our stores, to our sales advisors, and we need to start creating that connection. Which is something that we understood that we had, how can I say it, for granted in Europe in a sense, and now we have to build completely from scratch. So local activation, community activation, it would be the key for us this year.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, it's not necessarily huge events. Outside of, one event that our brand does incorporate in the summer, I think it's about meeting the customer where they are. And so for us, we have our stores, we have, a great network of about 20 stores globally that we, have these micro events where we understand our customers are busy. If we say, hey, we're doing an event on this night, they have things every night of the week. And so what we try to understand is, what do they have going on? If they want to host and do something in our stores, that ability is there as well. So for us, it's more personalized, it's more individualized, and caters to what their passion points are, whether it's a charity event, whether it's a dinner, intimate dinner with friends, whether it's a birthday party, right? And friends could all, contribute to a gift card that then you can shop with, and that's their gift to you, right? And so, it's a little bit more creative. It's a little bit more intentional in terms of how we approach the customer. And it's about giving them what they want too, right? And then within this experiential luxury setting. And so for us, it's a little bit more intentional, and it's very much personalized.
We had a few good moments last year, which we're really grateful for. I think keeping on the four wall type of theme. One example that comes to mind is a pop-up shop that we did in Martha's Vineyard in the middle of summer last year with the Faraway group. So we had partnership with the Faraway Hotel there. It was I think a 3-day event, maybe 4 days. We did a custom print pajama that was a Martha's print pajama. We did a whole bunch of exclusive ready to wear that was Martha's theme or sort of New England oriented. We partnered with a couple of brands, like Land's End did a specific tote for us. And then we also brought in some local vendors. So we had an amazing coffee maker there. We had a beautiful florist there that was selling things. And we set up on the kind of balcony and wraparound. It's a beautiful property if you guys haven't been there. We had a line around the block 2 hours before opening, to the extent that the police had to come and do crowd control.
It's a high class problem.
It was insane. And we ended up doing probably 30 to 35% of what we would have done had we had a 12-month store there in terms of revenue in 3 days. Yeah.
3 or 4 days.
Yes. And all of the ancillary benefits of a pop-up from an economic point of view, you layer underneath that. So it was effectively sold through at 100%. The marketing was invaluable, because you can imagine all weekend we had all of these videos of people lining up for this stuff. We had a Jeep that was wrapped in the Roller Rabbit monkey that if you spotted it on the island, you got, a free package. So it was one of those things where we realized, it's to my earlier point, that you don't necessarily have to have a 5-year lease on a permanent store in certain situations. But it's really important to physically be there in the way that you want to be there from a shop perspective. And I think where we're seeing a lot of fun conversations with landlords around the country and people who own property or whatever it might be is that flexibility around that, of that idea of saying, look, come and do something. Let's do something fun together and both benefit from it. It might not be a traditional lease, but so that was one of maybe, I think we did 8 pop-ups last year. So that's become a really big part of our programming.
Great.
I have maybe a more boring answer, but I think what we've seen a lot of success from is old school clienteling. If you've got a great store manager who's reaching out to customers and contacting them and letting them know a new product is, and if you've got a great staff that's greeting them at the door and creating an environment that they want to shop in, to me that has become the most reliable form of continued success. Our Draper James store in Nashville, I don't know if anyone's been there. It's like sunshine and 4 walls. You just walk in and it's an incredible sense of joy that they bring. You're greeted at the door in a way that isn't annoying, where it's how can I help you? But there's a pleasantness about it, and the customer comes back for that experience. And our best customers are given a heads up when new product is coming in. And I think again and again, when the customer has so many choices, to be ignored, either figuratively or actually, is not going to help anybody.
Great.
I perfectly agree with that. 100%.
Yeah. That's similar to your business model, old school clienteling.
And same for us.
And I think that's really thinking back to my experience in retail too. At the end of the day, there's been a lot of different substitutes, but that practice has been somewhat alienated, and now it's seen center stage.
And it's hard, frankly, because keeping staff in retail is not always so easy.
More turnover than
some incredible amount of turnover, even more than the restaurant industry. And to keep a staff that is trained and who knows the customer and who's leaning in and who is motivated and incentivized to act like this is a career position is not easy. But it's
hard to help.
Yeah, but it's often the difference between a store doing well and not doing well. Everyone, am I paying too much for the lease? Do we have the right assortment? You can start doing all the analysis. But do you have the right people?
Yeah.
That kind of leads into my next question for you guys is that, if you look at the audience in this room, is in the business of selling store leases, which are more expensive than they've been probably in the past, like 7 or 8 years. The cost of human labor, especially talented one, is more expensive than ever. The cost of goods, when you add tariffs to the equation, are potentially more expensive than ever. Like, this is an expensive business to be in at this point, but it seems from a supply and demand ratio, we're also as a collective group busier than we've also ever been. The amount of great availabilities are less than they've ever been, at least from my experience or recollection. So, when you look at pro-forming a new store or a new opportunity, what other aspects of distribution are you looking to try to like swallow those added costs at this point? That makes sense. Like, if you have an example in terms of your success in .com associated with a specific trade area you're opening the store, like things of this nature, how do you offset the fact that this is more expensive than it's ever been?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, we spend more and more time. We have a data scientist on our team now, and we spend more and more time looking, obviously, at e-com and marketing data to help us decide where to open another store. I mean, we don't open a lot of stores compared to our competitors. We have 14 now. We might open 1, maybe 2 a year. I mean, it's not really something that we're going full into for the reasons you just described. And also because when we do it, we want to do it properly. Like, we want to do it really, really well. But one example for Roller Rabbit, which is kind of illustrative of this, is that LA for us was a weird market. We used to be in Brentwood Country Mart for a long time before even I was there, before the current ownership. We got kicked out of there. We ended up opening on Montana Avenue as like a stopgap, which is a weird area if you guys know that area. But, it did fine. But the idea was, okay, let's just open there and figure it out. Did so badly that we just shut it down. We saw LA as a kind of e-com city drop from like 3rd in terms of e-com locations for us to like 8th when we had no store there. And then we just a year ago opened in Beverly Hills, in an area that's kind of not exactly North Beverly, which is where we wanted to open. We're just around the corner, but it's better for us. And LA jumped right back up again. So I don't think it's like an unknown thing that stores are client acquisition tools and that they boost e-com. But for a brand like ours, we see it happen in real time because we have no wholesale. So it's really like an important thing for us. But where we now look is, okay, where are the e-com dollars going, and where are we not seeing quite as much potential out of that market? Houston, for us, we don't have a store there. Atlanta, we don't have a store there, for example. And can that be a $4, $5, $6 million store? And then all of a sudden, the economics are much easier to swallow. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's so much quantifiable data that's available to understand what you can do in a market before you enter that market, that, it's really important from, a CRM standpoint, a competitive standpoint. What are the competitors that we look at that fall within our brand ethos, price positioning, to kind of see and determine what makes sense. I mean, outside of wanting to be on every high street, whether it's Madison, whether it's in LA and in Beverly Hills, Bal Harbor, there are markets that do make sense depending on, your offering, what your brand brings to the market, whether you're just focused on, linen shirts and you want to open up in Florida, or you're focused on ski gear and you want to open up in Aspen. And so I think, especially for a brand like ours, we just opened up a store in Vegas in the Wynn. And, what we found before we opened was that this made complete sense. A lot of our customers are there. A lot of our clients not only just live there, but they visit there frequently. And so how can we now create an experience for them while they're there? And so all the information, all the data was there, and it made sense for us to open. Now, we can look at the price of it and it's like, all right, does this make sense? And so the plan going in is, all right, we need to drive X amount of volume for this to make sense. And you start to build out that plan even before opening. And so, whether it's small things like, just old school clienteling, hey, getting information and kind of crowdsourcing. How often are you in Vegas, talking to some of your clients and getting that information? I think it's super important to understand and level set those expectations before you go in. But if the numbers make sense, it makes sense. And if it doesn't, then you'll find a reason not to do it. But there's other factors I think that are also important in terms of brand visibility, brand equity, and how you want to be viewed in the market, right? So if you have the right adjacencies, it's also important for a brand too. So a brand may say, the numbers don't make sense. Yes, but you're sitting next to brand A, which is highly coveted, and brand C, which is highly coveted, and you can be brand B that's sitting in between that, and now you're attracting a new clientele, a new customer as well. And so then it's up to you to make sure that you're engaging in that and providing the experience, the product, so on and so forth. But, there's so much data that's available now, more so than ever, that, it's easy to make a very informed decision about why you want to open in a market and, why it makes sense and why it doesn't, bottom line.
Well, before even starting looking into the first opportunity, the brand, as Eddie was saying, CRM was a very big part. We were selling through our e-commerce since I believe I was not in the company at the time, but since 8 years. So a lot of data, a lot of information. So something that we wanted to do since last year that I really pushed to let it through. It was to start testing the water and then the markets through our concession partners. Because for Bloomingdale's, we signed a very interesting deal with them. We opened 7 locations last year, and it's quick and easy to understand how the markets can give us. Because in a couple of months, we can pick up a location, we can open the store, and start operating immediately, and see how the brand is responding to the customers. And that for us right now, it's the best way to really understand where we should move. Of course, Bloomingdale's are not always in, sometimes are in a mall where we might be interested to open. We're going to double our presence there as well. Sometimes they are in areas where, they're far away from downtown, and instead we are looking for the brick and mortar locations. But it's still a very good way to understand the appetite for the brand for us, which again, we're still in an earlier phases, I would say, than my colleagues here.
Just to be clear, and so people understand, the Bloomingdale's that you're operating, it's your stock, it's your staff.
Yeah, it's a
your
pure
real estate.
concession model. So it's a retail store.
It's not. It's a
our
replacement for
Yeah,
wholesale.
Absolutely. But again, the speed is much faster.
But you
than
control it.
retail. So absolutely, yes.
But that's also a great point, is that, wholesale was always a key indicator that you can use. If you're in a department store or a specialty store and you're driving a certain level of volume, that's always been a key indicator in terms of what is the potential of that market, right? So now you can give them your experience, your brand immersion to that same client who's walking into a multi-brand environment. And so if there's an affinity for the brand, it's always been, a pretty strong way to understand your success in the market as well.
Yeah.
I think to your point also is thinking about how to use these spaces for more than just selling product. Brands have an incredible amount of expense that goes into photography, goes into events. And to be able to think of a retail space as more as a home for your brand, not just a cash register and a place to sell product, is really important. And obviously I think for a lot of people probably here, helping to sell that dream is really important, because brands are ultimately very focused on expense management and revenue growth. And if you guys, as part of the advisors within the industry, can help us when we're coming in to look at a store, see what the vision can be.
Yeah.
That's often not what we're best at, right? We're thinking is, how do we maximize, how do we get all our products into the store? But sometimes someone needs to guide us and say, well, this is actually an area you can be doing photography. We can set up a whole studio in here. It's a great event space. And I think being able to quantify that,
Like repurposing the space.
repurposes of what it can be. And again, what's an environment that you can have after hours events in, that you can creating more of an experiential environment. Some stores are not right for that. It's just about how many sweaters can I jam in there. Other stores are perfect for that, and brands aren't capitalizing it. But with less and less department stores by the week,
Yeah.
there's less and less opportunity to control your own destiny. And so the only way to do that is to open your own stores. But by just creating a store, you are losing an opportunity in creating a community and an environment where people can engage with your product and engage with your brand.
That leads me in my next question. if you guys could just give us your personal opinion, professional opinion about like what's the future of wholesale distribution look like in this country. Obviously, we're on the brink of a lot of dramatic changes with Saks. Other footprints are shrinking. Either comment on that or perhaps like a multi-branded retailer that you see in the marketplace that's actually setting a new standard. Because like for the audience here, I'd love to know, what's a great store to go visit? Who's doing this better? Who's knocking the cover of the ball? If you were to open up distribution to wholesale, what would be a multi-branded store that you'd consider? This type of thing. I know, you don't have it necessarily in your business.
Well, I mean, just quickly, I think like the only thing I would love to add is that we, as a brand, we never believed too much in the pure wholesale distribution because the lack of control of the product or the brand. So for sure, it won't be one of the first things that we will do inside this market. We are not doing wholesale distribution anywhere in the world. So we're just going pure retail everywhere, either franchising when it's a country that we can't operate directly. But wholesale might be the cherry on top when we, want to just reach the last gap of revenue expectation because we want to make a specific amount of money. Yes. I was able to see in this market, and please tell me if I'm mistaken, like only the strongest brand that were able to negotiate with the department stores the perfect space, the dedicated space, they were able to present themselves correctly. There's still the culture here of that like mass distribution of products in a very, very big store such as Neiman Marcus or our players, which is not too premium enough for our brands at the moment, and also doesn't allow the brands to control enough the brand itself, the way it's presented, the way it's styled, the way it's sold, the way it's storytelled to the customer. This is our opinion at the moment. So pure concession for us for now should be the only way to go to department stores.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'm a bit torn on wholesale because I do, for the points that you mentioned in terms of how you control your brand visibility and the ethos of your brand within, third-party channels are always going to be a challenge. I do think it's where most customers discover your brand and your product, right? Because in this big box environment, they get a chance to walk through. There's discovery. There is, there's usually some sort of information given through, sales associates and who can talk about your product and then go through a multitude of products, right? And so it's the same with like, for me, like classification business, like outerwear, like coats for men. A guy doesn't want to have to go to 10 different shops to find a coat. He just wants to, hey, where's your coats? I want to see all the coats. And he just wants to see it and shop it and just, have that. And so I think that, wholesale kind of provides, that, in a very, unique way, at least in the US. For me in the US, it's way more important. It's the way that US customers shop. I think the one that's doing to me, the most incredible job right now is Mitchell's and their store. It's a little bit of a specialty store / department store, but it's not. I mean, they focus on quality craftsmanship and all of the right brands, and they have a fantastic staff as well. I think Nordstrom's does a great job as well. They're a little bit more pedestrian in nature in terms of their client base and what they're offering, but great discovery, great way to discover a new brand. And then as you grow up with that brand, you would go into a DOS or directly operated store to have a full immersion, full experience of the brand. And so I think that that's key. But I think wholesale still has a place in the US. I think the specialty store business is going to emerge, that personalization when you walk into the right specialty store and how they treat you as a client who just wants to come in. If you're a young executive and you want to learn about suits and don't want to feel like a schmuck when you walk in because you're asking all the basic questions, where can you go, right? And so I think that that's where those channels are important. They still have a place in the retail landscape of the US, and how it continues to evolve with all these other forms of channels and ways to shop, remains to be seen. But I do think that touch point to the consumer is still important and still has, merit and place in the US, despite the lack of, how you can, what rack you're on, what space you're at, things like that. And so I think it's going to be interesting. Over this year is going to be the most interesting with, some of the news that's obvious about, who's able to last and on the test of time.
Yeah, I mean, from the future of wholesale, it's rocky. I mean, I think it's almost existential at this point. I mean, we exited wholesale in the end of 2022. At the time, it was probably 34% of our revenue. So it wasn't like we were walking away from a declining top line business. It was the opposite. But it was when we spent 6 months looking at it in and of itself, it was a loss-making business economically in the literal sense, which I think a lot of businesses do run with that, and that can be fine. For us, it was not. But I think the bigger thing was that the promise that Wholesale Partners used to make and keep of presenting you in an interesting way to new customers and making your brand look special on the floor and having people that could sell it in a way where they knew what they were talking about, that's largely disappeared because so many of them are in triage right now. So once you have that situation, then that promise goes away. What's the point? I mean, I can go and do, to our earlier discussion, a pop-up or a collaboration or something and generate that energy and get 70% margin myself. So, I think there's a real question mark, and obviously we're seeing it, and it's not just in physical multi-brand retailers like Saks, it's filtering up to online. We've seen it with Matches, we're seeing it with Essence. So I think it is existential. And I think also, even as a consumer, all you have to do is like walk into a department store on the weekend and look around at who's shopping there. I mean, no Gen Z, and I mean, this is a huge generalization, but there's no Gen Zers wandering around a department store trying to find what to buy. Like, they made that decision online overnight. Like, they're not, so that's kind of, obviously we're pretty bearish about it. But on the flip side, to answer your question, there's a whole host of really interesting smaller multi-brand outfits that are coming through, because at the end of the day, multi-brand is in and of itself, I think, always going to be a relevant concept. And so we, on the men's side, there's Ven Space over in Brooklyn. If you guys don't know it, go check that out. It's a great little multi-brand store that I think he'll grow that. Canoe Club in Denver is another good example. There's on the kind of kids women's side of the business, Maisonette, Tuckernuck doing a really good job. At the bigger kind of major level, Dillard's has always done a great job. I think they're probably one of the few examples right now of a company that they've got cash in the bank, they pay on time, they've got enough of the business figured out that they can actually like legitimately focus on the brand plus pay you when you meant to pay, which helps.
Keyword pay.
Yeah. But as far as all of the old style of doing business, like it's existential for sure.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. Future's not looking good for wholesale. Amazon is actively calling better brands to try to build an Amazon store footprint for brands in ways that they haven't been before. There's an entire department at Amazon dedicated to trying to get premium and luxury brands up and running in a very big way. They've been watching the Saks news for a long time. They realize that people are going to need a place to sell. And I think we'll see more specialty shops opening up in a localized area, and I think they will succeed. But that's not a volume play for anyone. That's a brand introduction play. But if you're a brand and there's a great shop that opens up in Westport, you'll do well there. But it's going to take a lot more to replace some of the department store business. And it comes back in many ways to the retail store concept. I think you're just going to, existentially, brands are going to have to start focusing on their own stores again.
Yeah. I think the majority of clients that people in this room are picking up, they happen to fall into this world of, I'm big in the wholesale business. I don't have a lot of four-wall experience or a very limited distribution. And it's like, it's a fire alarm. They're really, if they don't have figured out to the level that you guys have things figured out, it's a panic attack. And I see it day in, day out, and it's a stampede, and it's creating this supply and demand ratio, and it's creating, a lot of these elevated cost matrices that I was referencing earlier. But, if you don't have your shit together with four-wall distribution at this point, and the writings on the wall to all your points about, the antiquated nature of department stores and the type of customer profile that's ultimately shopping there, you have a real problem. You have like a $200 million business going to 25 real quick.
Yeah.
Um,
And I would add, and not just to pat you on the back for the audience today, but one of the reasons why I think our relationship has been so beneficial is that you come from this world. And so when we're looking at opportunities within retail, you're coming with a lens of a buyer, a merchant, a retail operator. And sometimes that is what brands need when they're assessing a new store is what's the bigger picture here? And what's the outside perspective? What am I missing? Great point. Brands lose money in wholesale all the time. And so it's not just about, oh, I lost all that revenue. Well, you're also avoiding all of that expense that went into that as well. So if we take a step back and we say, okay, you're going to open a new store on your own, what's that cost going to be to you? Yes, but how much are you not going to be losing anymore that you can actually reinvest into your own space again
and control it.
So it's a much bigger picture, and I do believe that more often than not, even the great CEOs who are running companies today often need someone in your space, in real estate, who can do some of that extra thinking and advisory support at what's the bigger picture that sometimes we're missing when we think very myopically about four-wall profitability.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I was going to throw out one thing. I do
Go
think
ahead.
the product category matters. I think that one of the things that we have to think about too is what am I selling, right? So when you look at beauty, and I think of, as you guys are talking, I'm thinking of this beauty brand called Ana Blue, and it was a small brand, and they went into wholesale, I think begrudgingly, but it became a big success for them, right? And so they're in Shop-Off, they're in Sephora, and that discovery that's happening there. And even my 11-year-old, she wants to go to the mall and go to Sephora, and she wants to discover brands, and she spent a lot more than she was supposed to. But she came in, but she was talking about these brands like she, like an ambassador. And so I think that the product category matters, but also there's nothing that can replace connectivity to a brand when you discover it in a 4-box experience. And so I think it's something to keep in mind as we, as you think about what the future of retailing and wholesale is, that discovery is so important. It's kind of like old school clienteling, right? Just calling someone up. Hey, I'm just checking in. How are you? Do you need anything? Are you, how's your, I don't know, do you have white shirts? And he's like, no, I don't actually. I need a few white shirts. That matters, right? That connectivity. And so I think that, how do we ensure that we don't lose that, somewhere along the line as things become, a little bit more accessible, whether it's Amazon or, anything from an e-commerce play. But just taking getting out of the house and getting into a store is something that I think people are always going to need and want, but it depends on the product category for sure.
Last question. This is a concept that comes up a lot within fashion brands, is the importance of the very important clientele, the person who's generating 30% of your revenue but represents 6% of your overall client base. What's your guys' opinion on either magnifying that opportunity or trying to even the playing field and by bringing in new customers? Like what would be your preferred strategy? Is it to magnify that, or is it to deleverage it if it's a potential risk?
I think both are important, right? I don't think you deleverage any customer that wants to engage with your brand. If you have someone who's a VIC, and we have clients who, will spend $8,000 on a suit, and they need four of them because they want one in each home, and they want every closet to look the same, and they represent, significantly a higher portion of, our sales. But the guy who comes in once a year and still wants, he still wants to be treated the same, and so you still need enough of that to drive and quantify the business. And so I think two things can be true in which you should continue to engage these VICs, allow them, I think the access changes, right? Maybe they're going to a fashion show, maybe they're invited to a lot more that you offer in terms of experiences for the brand. But I think they are just as the guy who spends I don't know, maybe $5,000 or $20,000 a year versus the guy who spends $300,000 a year. I think for luxury, you still want them to have the same experience, right? And you still need more of those $10,000 dollar customers per year versus a 300, and you want the experience to be somewhat.
Would you prefer to have 10, 20,000 guys or one $200,000 guy?
That's a hard one because I think there's more, your product is on more backs than the one customer, right? But that one customer has influence. I think they are in their social circles, they inform the choices that other people make.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're the guy in your crew and you're rocking, our brand and you look great in it and everyone's like, man, I can't wait to, look like that or get that, that's also as important as having, 20 guys walk down the street all in your product and they all look great, just the same. So I think it's a hard balance. Well, actually it's not a hard balance. It's what we're supposed to do, right? That is the expectation, in which, us from a merchandising, product, brand building, equity standpoint are responsible for, right? Making sure the guy who's spending this looks and feels a certain way, and the guy who's still spending this looks and feels a certain way. So it's hard to trade off. So, my democratic answer is two things can be true. You can
Get it both done.
get it both done. You got to get it both done.
Especially if you want your business to be stable, because you have to invest on both
Agreed.
and the clients. 100%. Yes.
It's also about future planning. And, a friend of mine in Louis Vuitton years ago told me that one of the most important products in their assortment is the mini coin purse. Right. It's an entry to the customer years before he or she is willing to be spending thousands of dollars on luggage. And so we think about that a lot. Jonathan Adler as a brand, it's a premium price point brand. Our first touch point to a customer is not going to be a $7,000 couch. Almost never. Right. Maybe if your interior designer is recommending it, but as an individual purchase, that's not going to be it. It's probably going to be a smaller decor item. And both points are true, but it's also about understanding for customer capture purposes, you often have to start with a coin purse, and identifying what your coin purse is going to be different for every brand. But when you're competing for attention, you have to create some sort of value in something that doesn't require a deep amount of thought and mortgage planning for.
Your clienteling, I mean, it definitely depends on the category. I mean, I spent my time in men's made to measure, and I think in men's suiting and men's made to measure, it's a huge part of the business, always will be, because it's such a specific relationship that a guy has with their sort of quote unquote tailor, whatever that might be. We sell pajamas and swimwear and intimates and all that type of thing. So it's I think on initial analysis, it's not as important, but we are actually trying to think about it in a different way and how we might apply some of the lessons that we all learn from the men's side of the industry to what we do. I think every business should have a clienteling lead who sits in head office, who just focuses on online clienteling only, for example, which we're starting to implement now.
Is that like a person that has a team in each, like one person in each store was the leader and they report into that?
Yeah, the stores are kind of that's where natural clienteling happens. We use a platform called Endear, and that kind of helps them a lot. And that's kind of an easy relationship because you just end up with them because you're talking to them face to face. So we've never had a problem with the store managers and assistant store managers and things using the right platform and clienteling, and we push them to do it. But that's not a hard thing. I think what we're trying to do is say, okay, what does that team look like if they don't have a store to operate out of, but they have rollerrabbit.com? We know we have, I don't know what it is exactly. I think it's 8% of our online customers accounting for 15, 20% of the revenue. I mean, it's the standard stat that everybody has. But a lot of those people don't have a direct line to us because they're just shopping online. So if someone's spending 20K with us online annually and they have no idea who to call and it's a customer service, that's obviously a huge amount of low-hanging fruit right there. So we're pretty focused on that. And I think we always take the viewpoint that just because traditionally a particular strategy in the sales side is confined to luxury or confined to menswear or whatever, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to implement our version of it in a, aspirational pajama brand that sells to millennials.
Yeah. Agreed. It's interesting. Does anybody else have any questions? I think we're getting close to our scheduled time here.
My name's Ben Navis with Reprovio Sager Manhattan. Just talking about that last touch point you mentioned about the focus on 8% of your customers are spending 50% online at nobody to talk to. do you see a human touch still required for something like that in that role, or do you see AI being able to handle something like that to those kind of steps? Like, is AI a helpful tool at a certain price point?
I think it will be for sure. I mean, for us, we see AI as helpful on the customer service side at more of like the sort of baseline level of inquiries. So like, can that help to solve? Exactly. Like, why is it taking so long? Whatever. It's obviously not sophisticated enough to be a true like clienteling agent for a $20,000 a year customer, but it's going to get there, I would assume. I mean, right. Yeah.
Like in a prediction, it's going to help you interpret the user needs of those customers, those high senders.
Yeah. I think it'll get the way we, again, and this is just our sort of viewpoint on AI, is that we've found a higher efficacy with AI within the operational side of the business as opposed to any customer facing side of the business at the moment. So we're using it in demand planning, for example, internally. We're using it in the design team if they want to quickly visualize a fabrication they've designed on a real life looking image, as opposed to waiting 2 months for that sample to come back from a factory in India. That's an incredible save of time and all that stuff. We're not seeing it at that level where you're talking about, where you feel comfortable like deploying it in front of a VIC. But I think it'll get there.
Hey, so, Execs from our a ton of retail around. The org man, the pattern that we've seen from a lot of retailer to the last 5 to 7 years, the change from the pre-COVID to sort of like smaller spaces, really focused on sales per square foot, expanding from like 2 to 4 to 6. And I think it relates to a lot of themes we were talking about, to make the store a little bit more to just shocking experience. I wonder if that's like an intentional conversation that's key at the brands.
I don't necessarily see that. I think sometimes it's probably a psychological response to like, go big or go home. And some people are like, if we're going to get into retail, let's do it great. Let's have the greatest looking store in the best corner. Part of that concerns me because there's one cycle you can bank on. It's that brands eventually will open too many stores. Most of them will be bad leases and find themselves in bankruptcy. You can set your watch to that. So I do believe as the pendulum starts swinging toward more stores, you will have some very bad decisions being made also. So I guess that's my short answer of saying I don't see it as an intentional lean to saying if we're going to do it, it has to be bigger and here's the thought behind it. But there's a never-ending supply of brands who make terrible retail decisions.
Blah. And you mentioned something interesting when we lost our store in LA. It went from 3rd in USD. And it's interesting to see the retail driving the overall traffic, the online traffic. How do you see retail decisions, site selection decisions based on online traffic and e-commerce in markets that you're not now? You're comparing geography, where you might put this.
Yeah, so I mean, it's still a combination of different factors, the quantitative and qualitative for sure. Like, I mean, we obviously track data pretty closely, but we have, I mentioned earlier, a campus bus that goes around to different universities, and that's a really good. Obviously, it's a good moment in and of itself, but it also does feed us a lot of information that, okay, maybe we should be looking at like Charlotte, for example. Like, we didn't really think about that before, but apparently we have a huge customer base there because of, a pop-up we did there, or because of a particular collaboration did really well, or the bus went through there and it just popped off. So then, but the one thing that I think, I know you guys might already all experience this, but one thing that I'll also notice that, like, we all talk to each other, the brands, probably more so than I think 10 years ago because of things like collaborations. Like, I mean, we do 10 to 15 a year with like Love Shack Fancy, Stony Clover Lane, Faraday, whatever. So I'm on the phone to those guys all the time. And so I think that, like, we used to see it all the time with, LVMH. And if you got LVMH and you got the other luxury guys in one spot, then you're good. Like, everyone else will palm. I actually think that's filtered down to contemporary brands, to advanced designer brands, to brands like us. I will call Stacy at Love Shack or Alex at Faraday or whatever if I know they're looking at somewhere And I think it's like none of us really love the idea of being like mall brands, quote unquote. So even in these situations where you're talking about a main street and there's all these different interested parties and owners and landlords and stuff, that actually makes a difference. Like where we all decide to open, sometimes that is a little bit of collective group thing for sure. Or like we opened in the lower end of King Street in Charleston like 5-6 years ago, and it was like us and like a bunch of local antique stores, and the only reason we did was because A, there was no availability up north, and B, it was too expensive for us at the time. And now everyone's down in the south. It's not necessarily just because of us. I think everyone faced the same issue. Dallas is another great example. Like we got kicked out of HPV. We knew that was coming. I was waiting for that call because it was like Alexander McQueen, Roller Rabbit, Brunello Cucinelli. I was like, all right. Yeah, like I love my brand, but at the end of the day, like I'm going to get that phone call, and sure enough, I did. And I think whatever, Vacheron Constantine's going into where we were. So then it's like, all right, do I open in North Park, or what else is going on? And that was a good example of like getting on the phone to a bunch of brands like us that want to get into HPV but can't anymore, don't want to go to North Park. So we open Knox, and now word is a bunch of other brands are doing it because it's like the obvious thing to do. So yeah, I think that clustering idea is actually becoming more and more important for sure.
All right. Well, thank you all. Ali, Sean, Ed, Corey. Hope you all learned something. I sure did. And thank you for coming.